This is Football at 4.
I'm fired up about it. I can tell you that, Sam. It's cool. It's like better than the alternative of like not talking about big games. So like this is what like division games should be, man. Like an absolute blast. Like Philadelphia and Washington battling for it. Like hell yeah. Like more. Division games are awesome, man. They're fun. They're a battle. You know them well. They know you well. Although we haven't played yet, a lot of players know one another's scheme and technique pretty closely.
Head coach Dan Quinn says, hell yeah, I'm pumped up about this matchup. It's Eagles and Commanders renewing their rivalry. For the first time, it seems relevant. Thursday Night Football, you can listen to it right here on 97.3 ESPN. It's time for Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. It's brought to you by Bet365. Whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Adam Caplan from the Inside the Birds podcast is here, and we've got an Eagles-Commanders matchup that means something, Adam Caplan. How are you, my friend?
I'm good. I hope you're doing well and your listeners as well. And yeah, I have to look it up. When was the last time both teams were what we call high-end teams who clearly competing for a playoff spot and the division at the same time? I know it's been a while. Just got to look that up, but it's great. We've got meaningful football. Look, I'd rather it be on a regular week, not a short week, but it is what it is. Hopefully the rain that's expected sometime late Thursday night will hold off. Right now it looks like it's going to. And we're gonna have a very fun game. I was talking to the Steelers earlier today. They felt really good about beating Washington. They felt and they a ton of respect for Jane Daniels and that team. And the Commanders, Mike, as we get into it, they're so far ahead of schedule. They're one of those teams. I know you and I talked about this. The future numbers, like the Vegas numbers, are around 6.5, 7 wins, and obviously they're going to surpass that. They're at 7 now. The question is, how good could they be? And they lost a very tough game, which I'm sure they would look back at and wish they had won. They had the lead. They were up 10 points, but blew it. But the bottom line is they're coming here on a short week, and it's a great test. There's no question about it. We've both talked about their schedule. I know a lot of people have talked about the Eagles' schedule leading up to this game. And look, you only play who's on your schedule. They've done a very good job so far, but this is clearly the best test they've had. I would say almost, Mike. I mean, we could debate. The New Orleans game. The Eagles played New Orleans when they were actually competitive, and they played great with shorthanded. But this is a game, Mike, you're going to learn a lot about this football team in this game.
Yeah, you mentioned the best test here. You take a look at some of their weapons here, and how Philadelphia can handle them. Daniels, McLaurin's been a problem for teams. He's obviously one of those. I don't know if he's a 1A wide receiver, but he's certainly a tier 2 type of guy. And you take a look about how good this team actually is, the Commanders.
So, Mike, one of the things that I like about the Commanders is if you look at the roster, you might scratch your head. You mentioned McLaurin. They don't have much opposite him. I mean, Olamide Zaccheaus, that guy, he actually was a starter to begin the season. Now, they're going with a rotation, Noah Brown and De'Ami Brown. And
he had a rough day at the office returning punts the other day, I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, I know, and he did, but Dan Quinn made it clear he's going to still return punts. But Zaccheaus and Christian McCaffrey's younger brother, who was a draftee this year, so they don't really have a second receiver. They're just going with a committee. Zach Ertz is their starting tight end. Zach, look, he's not going to outrun anyone. He's there for leadership, and he knows the offense. They're a team that is probably overachieved offensively because Daniels is so far advanced for a rookie, a really good processor. I'm talking to Washington about him. He's one of the first people in the building, not just players or coaches. He's there at 5:30 every morning. He's watching virtual reality. He's got the headset on. He gets that done. Goes to the meetings. He's advanced. And that's the thing with him. And he's a really good runner, Mike. This is going to be a good test for the Eagles defense. You mentioned McLaurin in his career against the Eagles, 4 100-yard games, 5 touchdowns. He's faced them 10 times, 58 receptions, 847 yards and 5 touchdowns. Really good numbers. A lot of them recently, Mike. That's going to be a challenge for them. I'm interested to see how much man coverage they play against them. How are they going to handle Terry McLaurin? Are they going to double him at all? Because you're not worried really about anyone else. You're just not at the skill position play. You're not. And I think for both teams, Mike, and I'm sure Washington will look at this game and they understand the Eagles are really talented on both sides of the football. It's just one of those games where you look at it and you go, you know what, this is a fairly even game. I would argue the Eagles are the better team because they have more talent, but we're going to find out Thursday night.
Yeah, and one of the things at Philadelphia here, you talk about the Commanders. Jaden Daniels, obviously, their draft class, he's the gem of that draft class, has turned everything around for them. What is Philly's draft class, the impact that they have made on why this team has really turned the corner?
Yeah, Mike, I wanted to talk about this because you and I talked about the Eagles rookie class a couple weeks ago, but we haven't really looked at something that's really happened kind of rapidly is all of a sudden guys from other draft classes are playing pivotal roles. So we all know that Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean have been tremendous. DeJean in particular, only that, he was coming back from the hamstring injury. He didn't play much early. Then he became their starting nickel. He's phenomenal. He's not your typical nickel. They use him in a variety of ways, and he's also great, really a good punt returner. Been really good at that. Quinyon Mitchell's shown he can play in man coverage. He's done a really good job. He's well ahead of schedule. He's already one of the better young corners in the NFL. He's shown he can handle really whoever he goes up against. He usually wins. We'll see how much that he's on Terry McLaurin this game. Now, the rest of their draft class this year, Johnny Wilson has scored his first touchdown. Look, he only has 2 catches, Mike. We jokingly call him a blocking receiver. That's all he really does. The touchdown he scored was not supposed to be to him. It was on a scramble drill. Anais Smith, you're seeing he's not. I wouldn't call him a factor, but they're using him a little bit more as a slot receiver. Will Shipley, look, he really only plays on special teams. He's getting garbage carries. Garbage time is what we call them, garbage time carries. But you know what? He's explosive. It's all about down the road for him, and he'll be Kenny Gainwell's replacement if they don't bring back Gainwell. We'll see what happens. Jalen Son, we're actually going to, I believe, we're going to break down his tape from last week, believe it or not, with Greg Cosell. Greg put a note in it that he liked the little tape that we've seen. He looked really explosive. So they've got some good returns, early on, particularly the first 2 guys. And, Mike, the word around the league is every draft class, you want a minimum of 2 starters. You're hoping for 3 by the end of their rookie contracts. Well, they already have 2 in Mitchell and DeJean. Let's, go through 3 years before we decide that they don't have a third guy. Jalen Santo, the Eagles are very high on. Last year's class, Carter is a really good football player, needs to be more consistent. He continues to play well, though, so they've got 1 starter there. Nolan Smith, Mike, he's done better this year than last year, but he's just not consistent enough. Tyler Steen in limited playing time has looked really good this season, Mike. He still has a very good shot. Joe Banner came on our show last week for Patreon, and Joe watches a lot of tape. He thinks they absolutely should go with Tyler Steen next. Brown is back from his injury. He's not contributing a lot on defense, a little bit, special teams especially. We need to give this time. This is going to be this is his second year. We know about his injury. We need to give this time. Keely Ringo is their 4th corner, which is really what most people around the league thought he would be. He did have a good offseason. Training camp round is good. You got to let this thing play through to see what happens next year in terms of what his role could be. But they're getting some returns from him. Tanner McKee could be the future backup, Mike. He's shown some promise. And Moro Ojomo is their first defensive tackle off the bench. So he's really contributing. This has been a good story. So they're getting some returns from that. The 22 class, we'll get to the disappointments in a minute. Cam Jurgens is really doing well as a starting center. Nakobe Dean has come on. Kyron Johnson didn't make it. And Grant Calcaterra, Mike, is contributing as a 6th-rounder. And finally, their 21 class, because you like to look at 3 or 4 years out. 2 home runs with Devontae Smith and Dickerson. Milton Williams has been really good. He's actually a starter now. Now, Ali McNeil's been better, the guy they should have taken, they were going to take, but Howie Roseman took Milton Williams. But, he's played well. Kenny Gainwell's been a good 5th-round pick because they've gotten production out of him. He's their backup running back. And Patrick Johnson, by the way, Mike, Patrick Johnson was one of the better special teams players for a while. So if you look at these 4 classes, the only guys of note in the first 4 rounds that they're going to miss on or have missed on, Jordan Davis clearly is not going to be the player that they thought they were trading up for. He's really good against the run, but you don't draft a run stopper in the first round. They got to be more than that. And they missed on Zach McPherson. Part of it was with the torn Achilles, and he never made it. He's with another team now. But other than that, Mike, for as much as people beat up Howie Roseman in his draft classes, Howie's done a lot better. There's no question over the last 4 seasons.
Well, and you mentioned Mitchell and DeJean right now this year. Those 2 have really, You can really point to those two and the way this defense has changed. I guess you got to also add Zach Bond. I know he's not a draft; he's a free agent signing. But man,
in terms of how they're better, yeah,
right. And Nakobe Dean being a guy that they drafted, and maybe him, and you mentioned Nolan Smith. They're not consistent enough, but these young guys on the defense has really changed the way this defense. Now, we talked about this earlier, Adam. Pittsburgh blitzed Daniels 53% of the time last week. I don't know that Vic Fangio's doing that this week. You see a Vic Fangio blitzarama?
We're going to talk more about this with Greg Cosell for tomorrow's show, the Inside the Tape show. But and also on our pregame show, by the way. But that's just not what Vic does. Now, one thing you could see, and what Vic brought out against New Orleans, it was fascinating because New Orleans had not seen the defensive front. Because it was an unscouted look. They'd never run it before. They'll drop Bond into the box and line him up on the edge a lot as an extra add-in defender to take away Kamara's cutback. We don't know yet who's going to start a running back, if Brian Robinson will be ready. I'd be surprised if he is, but we'll see. He's missed the last 2 games with a hamstring injury. He hasn't had a full practice in 3 weeks. And Daniels will run inside the 10-yard line. He'll run. They did a good job on Daniels' running ability last week to cut him off. So we'll see. Sometimes you got to change things up because this kid is so advanced and so smart, Jaden Daniels. You got to give him something different. But no, I don't see him blitzing that much. And quite frankly, really, when you look at it, again, you're really worried about Terry McLaurin. I mentioned our guys. Nakobe Dean. By the way, Nakobe Dean is an outstanding blitzer. He's another reason why that draft class of 22. I know Jordan Davis brings it down a little bit. Nakobe is finally coming into his own. Juergens is really good. Calcaterra, as I mentioned, is contributing. Just overall, Mike, you have one of the youngest defenses in the National Football League. You've got a lot of young players contributing on both sides of the football. I don't know, for the time we've talked about this in Football at 4 going back several years, I don't remember talking about so many young players doing well.
You're right, and they got one of the youngest defenses in football, so that's one of the reasons why we're watching this team grow. And we know they played a Dallas team that, Adam, I don't know, you've been doing this a long time, how ill-equipped that offense was to do anything. They did not trust Cooper Rush a lick.
It's so funny. On Cooper Rush, his yards per attempt was pathetic. I just remember talking to the Vikings when they faced him. They decided not to blitz him, and he tore them apart. It's really the only good game. I know his record overall was good, but the only game he played against, and he was really good on 40 attempts against the Vikings. He was so pathetically bad. We've seen some bad football over the years. It was one of the worst quarterback games I've seen. When in terms of the Eagles going up against the guy, they didn't even pressure. It's like when he had time to throw, but he moved for no reason. The ball went into the ground. It was so bad. I know people are blaming the sunlight on that, and I know for Jalen Hurts too, on some of the sacks he took. But come on, man, Cooper Rush is abominable. Why they did not go to Trey Lance is beyond me. And the fact that Mike McCarthy said that Trey Lance won't be the starter this week is pathetic. What are they playing for?
Your guess is as good as mine, but that was one of the worst offensive outputs I think I've ever seen. They did not throw the ball more than 8 yards down the field almost the entire game. And anything that went more than 10 yards down the field, Adam, it wasn't close. It was pathetic.
It's bad, man. And why Zeke Elliott really needs to retire. He's really finished. And Jerry Jones, how about him and CeeDee Lamb getting into it about the no curtains on the to block off the sunlight? I know Eagle fans are loving this, and me growing up as a Philadelphian, I'm not so I'm impartial. But for someone who grew up in the Philadelphia market, I just think it's so funny that Dallas is so pathetic.
It is. It's interesting to see what happens to them moving forward. Adam Caplan, everybody, he'll be back on Friday to take a look back at the Eagles, Commanders, and what it means in the NFC East. A win, the Eagles have a 77% chance to win the East. A loss, that drops down to 23%. Adam, we'll talk to you then.